digitaljamsessions.com. Hello and welcome to Digital Jam Session 2. Today I have with me Max Callis from Lloyd's Banking Innovation Group. You might want to reword that for me, Max.
No problem.
And also Gary Burns of MCM. So if you want to grab Max, it's at NWH Callis, K-A-L-I-S. If you want to grab Gary, it's at GT Burns. Greetings and welcome, fellows. How are you?
Not bad at all, apart from the traffic, as you know.
Yeah, pleased to be here, thanks.
Wonderful. Okay. So today we are jamming up the nature of the games industry with the banking and investment industries. So not an obvious collaboration to start with, but I believe we have an interesting concept, which is something to the effect of if banking and gaming already had a baby, which according to Gary would be Steam.
Yeah.
What would guys, come on, roll with me here. What would we consider as the kind of the key aspects of this new baby that's being nurtured, and what do we see as the potential way that this is going to grow up? What's the roadmap for innovation in investment and gaming?
Do you want to start with banking, Max, or shall I go on the Steam as banking and gaming had a baby theory? I probably need to explain that.
I would love to hear a bit more on the Steam theory here. The baby Steam.
Explain yourself, Gary.
Well, I know, having been in the games industry for sort of like a number of years now, and obviously still being around it with MCM Comic Cons. I just know a lot of people who are PC gamers, and you know, they probably spend as much time managing their Steam account as they do their bank accounts. And I think potentially, you know, Microsoft and Sony are going in the same direction already are of the same ilk with their own kind of online provision. But yeah, I think Steam really kind of got there first, and people want Steam credit. They want Steam credit. The strange thing is you can't cash in. I know people who play things like Counter-Strike, and you know, they just have they buy the most crazy items. They buy customized weapons and all that kind of stuff, and there's never any chance they're going to cash in, but they're quite happy to spend the money. So it's not strictly speaking a two-way banking thing, but it's the closest I can come up with. So I think, yeah, kind of banking and gaming already had a baby, and it's probably Steam. That's what I think.
Yeah, fascinating.
What do you think, Max? Do you think there is an example of this kind of collaboration in terms of there is a banking kind of element out there in terms of gaming, or not?
A banking element in terms of gaming. I mean, my feeling is there's a lot of currencies out there, and when it comes to digital banking, essentially all these things are just noughts and ones. And some noughts and ones can do some things, and some noughts and ones can do others. So it's interesting to look at the case of Steam. So there's an ecosystem there that represents transferring of values, which is one of the core things a bank does. It's interesting, Gary's point, that the limitation here is that ecosystem is kind of separate to the rest of the world where currencies or things of value are being transacted. So it's a bit like vouchers, essentially, that also represent value. The interesting thing is when you can interact between one of these value ecosystems and the others. So it'd be interesting if Steam essentially developed a currency exchange where people would be interacting more with other currencies, so pounds for most of us.
So,
Yeah.
okay then, maybe just kind of going slightly off the edge of Gary's original proposition, where do we think then that things like Bitcoin sit within that kind of economy?
It's quite. I was just about to mention Bitcoin, because that does, I think, the reason why Bitcoin is exciting for a lot of people. I don't use it myself, but I think the reason why it's exciting for a lot of people, and Max may well know more about it, it's just that it does kind of offer that bridge between, you know, kind of virtual currencies and the real world currencies, I think. Whereas, you know, with Steam, you can't, you know, it's not like a bank, and it's not like a casino. because you just can't cash out. You know, it's all about being in that world and spending currency in that world. And because a lot of conversation I had with this guy who, you know, he will remain unnamed, but he essentially, yeah, he's a big Counter-Strike player, and he just loves buying items in the game. And I'm like, well, that's great, because you can, you know, kind of almost take a spin. You could get this specialist item in game, and could that be worth something to you in the real world? Well, no, it can't, because you can't convert your Steam currency back into real world currency.
Then, having said that, Gary, you know, within the games industry, we know that gold farming is, you know, a fundamental issue, and that actually within the economies and the econometrics of most games, there is a real world element here in terms of real world value that can be attributed to the content of these games, and that people
only
are willing.
Through a black market.
Yes. So
only through a black market. Only a black market facilitates it into going back into real world currency. And gold farming, you're quite right, is a huge it's a huge industry almost in itself. Certainly not a kind of a strictly speaking a legal one.
do we think that there is a scope here in terms of the way that you know, cryptocurrency is moving forwards? Is this something that perhaps the games industry will embrace with you know, gold farming, and actually come to a point of gaining commercialization through legitimate avenues versus keeping this thing very, very much on the peripheral and making it black market?
I think from a games industry point of view, it's difficult, because I think what you're then encouraging, and it's already happening through these black market means. I mean, certainly some of the guys that I've worked with who kind of, you know, operate more in the sort of MMO, you know, strictly speaking, just online sphere. So it's just online gamers, people who sign up and buy their games through, you know, through the internet, you know, not using consoles, anything else, just PC gamers, to make that clear for the layman. And essentially, that they can't encourage that, because the amount of illicit procedures and bots and things like that are already infiltrating that part of the games industry, with a black market supporting them in terms of converting that back into real world currency. I think it would go through the roof if you kind of started encouraging that and facilitating it. So I think therein lies the difficulty, and it's just about, you know, it's a game. It's about enjoyment, and it's about people enjoying themselves within that sphere. And I think if you introduce that kind of that hard cash element, then it moves pretty quickly away from being a game.
So, taking it on a slightly different tack, then, Max, what's your view in terms of financial education? Is something that we are sorely lacking in the, you know, the education system, certainly here in the UK. It's one that's being, you know, gradually introduced, and they're looking to introduce this now. But do we feel that things like gamification, for example, are something that helps us to educate this generation on fiscal responsibility?
I would say absolutely it's got a part to play. We've actually sponsored a challenge with the government's Innovate UK scheme, which is the old Tech Strategy Board, and they have a project called I See Tomorrow with 5 challenges, and the bank's put forward one on financial literacy. And absolutely, I think gamification has a part to play. But just to come on to maybe a definition or understanding of gamification, I think what I like about it is it seems to make, on a simple level, tedious processes more fun and more engaging. But I think there's also a danger here in that gamification, I have a sort of skeptical view on it as well, which is the people playing it are the ones getting played, potentially. So steering people's behaviors towards one direction for their own benefit is great, but I think if it's manipulated too far, gamification can be just quite a manipulative way of engaging with customers. So I think we need to be a bit careful on taking the good bits, which is about increasing the enjoyment, about processes that people are likely to have to do, or it's in their own benefit. And then there's manipulating it, which is probably against their better, against serving them better. So gamification, I think, is a means by which to improve engagement, but I think we need to keep an eye on who's benefiting and keep it transparent.
So therefore, do you think that there is an opportunity further down the line for banking to innovate within the games environment and the games industry to actually educate, young players about banking and finance? I take the example of somebody like one of my favourite authors, Professor Joe McGonagall's kind of theory, which I'm going to incredibly reduce the overall assumption here, but bottom line, this notion that children are educated, between the ages of essentially 6 to 16, to become useful to society at the end of that period, and that during that same period of their lifetime, children spend as much time, if not more time, playing games, and so therefore games is educating them in some way on something, and Professor McGonagall had a lot to say about what that was educating them to do. But do we think that there is perhaps an opportunity here if we are teaching our children between the ages of 6 to 16, certain types of education? Is there an element to say here that gaming could be utilised during that same period of time to teach them something fiscally?
Yeah. Shall I step in that one first, Gary?
Yeah, go for it first. Yeah, definitely. I think it's a banking
I'd say, first of all, that absolutely this is a valuable direction to look in, and also that there's a lot going on in that space already. I've mapped out various projects in this area, and I split them across an axis, which is some of them help to educate people by using pretend money and letting them experiment with pretend money, and some of them on the other side of that scale use real money. And I think there's benefits and dangers of either. If you teach people lessons with pretend money, perhaps they're not really learning a good lesson. The other axis on which we split up what's going on in that space is a lot of these are actually for the parents rather than the kids themselves, and they risk the danger of being the kind of dancing dad. It's designed for kids on paper, but if you look more closely at it, it's actually designed for the benefit of the parents and reassuring them. And that can risk not being attractive to the kids themselves. The ones that are more attractive to kids risk the danger of not being so appropriate in the eyes of the parents. So I think it's interesting just to look at the spread of things going on in that space and recognise that if you chart them on that axis differently, they all have elements which are better or worse in helping financial literacy for children.
Yeah, I'd have to kind of first of all, your summary, Tanya, of the McGonagall quote, I think was very good. Of that whole theory.
She's gonna hate me for cramming it down into literally 10 words.
I thought you reduced it very well, but that, kind of almost coincidentally, that's kind of what the gamification argument for me is anyway. It's kind of this reductivism thing, and I think the dancing dad analogy is quite nice as well, Max. To be perfectly honest, it's it's all about application, and I think if we move away from 6 to 16-year-olds for a moment and just look at people at any age and at any juncture in their lives, and everybody prefers doing something that's less tedious. So if it's a serious process or something that has a serious end result, then I think in context, it has to remain something that is done in a proper way, is done in a proper fashion. But I think wherever you can, I think an example would be on a much lesser level, on a very scaled down level, would be, the capture stuff that you do when you've got to pass a security thing on a website entry or something like that. I can't remember the name of the company, and so I'm not able to promote them at this point in time. But they did an alternative where you just basically played a simple game, and you got through that process. And I was really keen in one or two of the ventures that I was involved in to get in touch with those guys and implement that system, because I thought it was just, even though it was only talking about a few seconds here, and it was probably saving you maybe 10 seconds overall, but you're actually having a lot more fun while you were doing it than trying to sort of pick out a strange code on the back of something, which it was just a more enjoyable experience. So on a really watered down level, I think that kind of thing works well. But yeah, it's all about the application, and I don't think you can kind of, if something is a serious process that requires serious thought, then it probably shouldn't be watered down to the point where it's merely a game.
Okay, so
specifically around banking, perhaps. I think
banking is a serious subject.
It is pretty serious.
I'd like to challenge that. It is unfortunately labelled as a serious business. It's a comment I'm often making at the bank of, just because we're a bank, does it have to look like a tax return? I think there's room for improvement, but it's my feeling overall on this fascinating kind of interaction between gaming and banking is I think banking has so much more to learn from gaming than gaming has to learn from banking, really. Just in terms of serving customers better, the games industry, from my limited understanding, just seems to be naturally so much more responsive to real human beings. I think the bank's probably a little guilty of responding better to logic than emotional needs of people. And the games, I mean, we would struggle to quantify return on investment and the benefits from making things more fun. Whereas my guess is in the games industry,
that's the aim. Yeah,
there's just more respect for the value of people enjoying themselves and accepting that by the time you could drill this down into quantifiable, measurable means, you may struggle, but perhaps there's something in the analytics. I mean, my understanding in terms of analytics and watching people playing their games, and you can work out the dropout rate, let's say, on each level of a game. And
you would be surprised how much you have in common, actually, when it comes to things like game economies and just even just econometrics. I mean, there is an econometric system that we look at in a lot of these gaming environments. We move people around an ecosystem, and we need to move commodities around. But this actually brings me to a really nice topic that I wanted to squeeze in here somehow, and you've given me the perfect opening, Max. Thank you.
Good.
Is that, yes, I think that there is definitely kind of a certain degree of the unknown when it comes to the banking and the games industry. But I know that you have very recently learned and discovered for yourself the joys of a hackathon, which is a very game and tech and kind of new startup type thing. But why don't you talk us through your experience of a hackathon and why? Why would you, from the banking world, be involved in such a thing?
Sure. Well, my role at Lloyds Banking Group is in the innovation culture and events team. So this is really about developing a culture for innovation. It's quite sort of fear-driven industry, heavily regulated. The approach of, I think, the majority of people working there is, can I get home today without screwing up? So it's not a kind of environment which encourages people to experiment and explore. But by running series of hackathons at the bank over the last 2 years, we've created a safe environment for doing exactly that. So what we've done that for is the bank typically has quite a cold, process-heavy way of producing new services and improving what we do, which I like the analogy. We use it like, that's like the league games. We do it week in, week out. What the hackathon does is it provides a different kind of route to developing products and services, which is a bit more like the FA Cup, where everyone's involved and anyone can win it. And we tend to get a bit more customer-centric, a bit more emotion-led propositions, having a chance to get further towards a pilot through that. But I think that the thing you're alluding to here is I do 4 days a week at the bank, and on the 5th day I work for a charity, UN Influx, and this is about exploring digital opportunities for a better United Nations. So our hackathon, our first one, was 3 weeks ago. Still recovering from that, but I think we've managed to achieve a success with that, which I think we got a couple of born here success stories that I'm confident will go on and have impact. Plus, we've produced a nice video telling the story, so I think we can get sufficient support required to go on and do an international one around autumn time. But for anyone who hasn't done a hackathon, the best thing to do is just go and join in, see what's going on. You don't have to stay the whole time if you lose interest, but to see people put their head on the block, put out an idea they want to build, and try and get people together and make it happen. It's extremely exciting process that just does let in a new range of opportunities that a more traditional process-heavy approach of 9 to 5, head at your desk, is unlikely to produce.
And on the flip side, this is very much a games industry thing. So Gary, have you got any wise words for anybody who maybe hasn't been to a hackathon before from a games industry perspective?
It's not something I've got a huge amount of experience of, to be perfectly honest with you, but I have heard very good things. So maybe this is something which it's it's. I mean,
okay.
Yeah, I think I think Max is definitely your best port of call for hackathons.
Well, what I would say is to anybody listening who hasn't been to a hackathon before and wants to figure out what it's all about within the games industry, try a game jam as a starting point. Okay, yeah. So I have another question for you guys in terms of kind of fiscal responsibility and also the games industry. I think that a really strong trend that we have seen and almost perhaps is now even kind of going into a little bit of a sunset here is crowdfunding for new development, new games, new platforms and new content. It's something that we've seen a lot of indie studios, a lot of indie developers really jump on that bandwagon with crowdfunding. Do we think that this has been an interesting education from a banking and investment perspective in terms of teaching these new businesses or these individuals really how to go about getting investment?
So I might need to get that paraphrased into to respond.
Do you think that crowdfunding has a value in terms of educating from a banking and an investment perspective?
Absolutely, yes. I mean, I think it provides an opportunity for people to put their money where their mouth is and kind of take responsibility and accountability for their financial decision making. And it allows you to engage at a level you are comfortable at. So in referring to the kind of matrix where I would plot different financial literacy programs, this for me would fit on there as one that actually kids and parents could like, and it would have the benefits of using real money. So I think it's a fantastic way to get involved, and I think people, by buying into a story of a product development, that there's huge amounts of education implicit in being an investor. So I think it ticks the box in a massive way.
And what would you say is on the flip end? Can you give us any examples of something that's on the flip end of your matrix?
So the flip end meaning using unreal currencies. Mm-hmm. There's quite a range. What would be a best example of pretend currencies?
Aside from Monopoly.
Well, that's, to be honest, is a good example. It's not a digital example, but that is pretend money, and you watch how that skews people's characters and behaviors, generally not in the best way. But mine's blank on an example. There are lots of games where you use tokens to buy things and spend things which have no link at all to real money. Some of them have a loose link, meaning they don't really have a means, but let's say you're in a game where that currency could be sold on. It just has a very diluted value.
Okay, so very briefly, what do you see as the future landscape for your industries respectively? So Gary, first of all, going to you.
Sorry, I brilliantly just had a call come through then when you were asking that question. So if you could just rephrase for me, I was thinking up a response for the Kickstarter discussion, which
share with us your response. We want to hear your response.
Yeah, because that's probably where my mind was at before somebody then brilliantly decided to call me on my iPad. But yeah, I mean, yeah, just to I think to echo the first point that Max made about crowdfunding and just it's the general accessibility, and I think the aspirational elements of it. I'm a big fan, just because, I mean, purely even from just the public relations point of view, which is kind of like, I feel like my core industry when you go beyond games. It's just lovely to see those stories and the range of ideas that people have. I mean, if you look at the sort of initial Kickstarter portfolio and the kind of ideas that were being promoted in the US and that were being funded, even if it was just, I think one that really caught my attention, and it was nothing to do with games, and certainly nothing to do with banking. It was just somebody had floated the idea of having a bus stop that was kind of like an art installation, and I think it was somewhere like Portland, typically enough in the States, where they'd come up with this idea. They'd got the funding. I think they'd got probably 200% of what they asked for, and they showed you the end result, which was just this fantastic place to spend time while people were just waiting for a bus. It's a really simple application like that. It was beautiful. It had like its own garden. It had art that had been contributed by local artists and things like that, and it just looked like a really nice place to spend time. And you sort of think, well, if something as simple as that, can be created, from this crowdfunding idea, a source like Kickstarter, then it's got to be a really good thing. And I think it makes it so much more accessible for people who've got ideas and want to make them into real world applications and find the money to do that, because obviously that's necessary. Then crowdfunding is a fantastic way to do it.
So I was asking while you were busy being distracted by a phone call.
Sorry about that.
That's okay. I was asking you guys to let me know about key things that are coming up on your horizons, in your industries, things that we may not have heard about, and just to understand what's the big story that's exciting you right now.
Just looking ahead at this year, I think one of the big stories is there's going to be a range of branchless banks coming along. And while they're independent banks, they generally sit on someone else's banking system, so they're not entirely independent, slightly limited in that respect. But in this sense, it's kind of for banking the leap between CDs and MP3 files, where the physical, tangible good, like the branch, is going to be challenged, and people's need to have that physical element is going to come under more threat than we've had in the past. So it'd be a fascinating time to watch whether the public is interested to go with branchless banks in a significant way that challenges the current situation, which is dominance by a few big brands. So yeah, we're about to discover a lot more in that, and there's generally this kind of siege situation between large banks who dominate the banking industry and loads of little startups around the edge which are taking quite juicy cuts, but out of what are for the bank not the core banking subjects like savings and mortgages, but things like look at currency transfer or peer-to-peer lending coming up. So there's lots of activity going on out there, which is really exciting and providing the public with a great new range of options with their financial decisions. But I think this year we're about to find out the public's appetite for going with smaller, lesser-known brands to do their banking with. That I think is the most exciting storyline coming up this year.
That is exciting, I think, on the banking side. I just have to comment on that. It's nice to know that, there are, kind of maybe smaller lenders and financiers that are out there who can offer people a little bit more diversity in terms of their financial services. I think that's a good thing. That's quite refreshing. Purely on gaming, I think it's similar. Almost the embracing now, I think, by some of the big gateholders in gaming like Sony and Microsoft of the kind of the indie market, and I think particularly with stuff like PlayStation Plus, where as a subscriber, every month I get an update on a new game that's available to download, and it's by somebody I've never heard of, and I get to interact and engage with those titles, which is exciting, and it's not something that you'd never really do before outside of PC gaming, to be perfectly honest. And I think just a general, putting my MCM hat on, I think just a general trend towards modern culture and pop culture kind of merging in this country, in terms of the kind of attendance we're seeing at Comic-Con events and things like that, and video games and comic book culture.
If we're going to talk Comic-Con, I think we have to give a nod and a shout out to the new project from Alan and Nathan, Con Man. Go to Indiegogo, check it out, guys.
Yeah, I've seen that too, and yeah, likewise, it looks good.
But in closing, any URLs or websites that you would like to point people at, Max?
Sure. Well, on the UN Influx project. It's uninflux.net. Otherwise, Twitter handle MWHKALIS.
Gary, what about you? Any URLs, handles that you want to give out there?
Obviously, mcmcomiccon.com.
And what's the date on the London show, Gary?
It's the 22nd through the 24th of May. And we are going to 3 full days for the first time, and brilliantly, we're expecting that might take us up to around about 130,000 visitors over those 3 days. So it's
San Diego, watch your back.
We're not a million miles away. We're not a million miles away. No, we're getting there. We'd like to think.
Wonderful, gentlemen. Thank you very much for your time today, and thank you guys for listening. DigitalJamSessions.com